Jungle Deep, Deep, Deep. The podcast that explores the tropical lifestyle. Hello, this is your host, Dr. Jones. I am not the now famous Dr. Jones of the movies. No, that's not me. You see, Indy is my brother. And just as Indiana so much appreciates the treasures of history known as antiquities, I have always appreciated the treasures of a different kind, the treasures of nature, treasures of the jungle. We are on safari. Sorry, there is no going back. You are already a part of it, as are tropical plants and exotic animals, exotica music and jungle movies, tropical cocktails and exotic foods, rainforest preservation and wildlife conservation. And so, I am here with you to have fun and to explore the jungle.
From Digitiki.com.
Oh, a microphony.
And a phony at the mic.
Get up.
Oh.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
We have some wonderful acts, and I think we're all going to have a lot of fun. So, if we may, we'd like to start things off with a little music.
Welcome to the Quiet Village.
You have just heard the artful intro to the Quiet Village podcast, produced by my special guest, the amazing Mark Riddle. We're here today with a fellow who's really not only a veteran podcaster, but he's a webmaster and a musician and very deep into the Tiki culture and the Tiki music in particular. We know him as Mark Riddle, but he goes by Digitiki on the internet. And Mark, would you say hello and tell us a little bit about what Digitiki is?
Yes, aloha, everybody. Digitiki was actually my online handle. When I first got into Tiki, I realized that everybody had, quote unquote, Tiki names. So I, being into recording and at that time, trying to find everything I could on Tiki music digitally, I just figured, well, you know what? I'll be the new old Tiki. So Tiki is old, digital is new. So I just
think it's
combined.
Great. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. That's perfect. I think it's a really great name. And tell us, for those of our audience that doesn't even know what Tiki is, and that's probably just about anybody under the age of 30, just might not even be clear on what we're talking about when we talk about Tiki music. Can you give us a bit of an overview? Before you do, let me explain to our audience. You have this podcast where you present a mixture of different types of Tiki music. And I got to say, it's a beautifully done podcast. Very professional. It sounds gorgeous. I love it. I love it. It's a real treat, and anyone who wants to get introduced to this should visit Digitiki.com or iTunes and subscribe and check out your shows. You've been doing this for 4 years, which makes you a pioneer in the world of podcasting, because podcasting is just not that old or well established yet. Yeah. And you've been doing it from the early days of podcasting, and you've got 48 shows. Is that right now? You must be working on number 49.
I'm working on 49 and 50 at the same time, 50. Actually.
So your 50th anniversary is coming up. That's a big one. And that's a long time and a lot of work and a lot of shows. So I'm just very impressed with your work. And you tell us, if you would, a little bit more about what the heck is Tiki music for those that may not be too clear about that.
Sure. Well, first off, I'm not on iTunes yet. For some reason, I think they rejected me, and I think it was for a technical
It'd have to
glitch.
be.
But I'm hoping to get on there. I'm still trying to figure out how to get on, but I'm not on iTunes yet. But Tiki music, that, or what is Tiki? I guess the bigger question. It's essentially a movement or an idea. I'm sure most people, or some people, have had some brush with what a tiki itself is, which is basically a little Polynesian carved figure that's carved in wood, and that is a tiki. But there's this whole movement called tiki, and it involves carved tikis, tiki mugs, tiki cocktails, the whole idea of, it's kind of the idea that you can just disappear on a tropical island with, where it's eternally sunset and the weather is constantly perfect and you always have a Mai Tai in your hand and you don't have to do anything else.
I like to include that vision, the beach with the ocean waves and the beautiful island girls walking by in their grass skirts. That's got to be part of the picture for me.
I couldn't agree more. That's kind of what it is. Yeah, it's escapism, really.
But it was a pop culture phenomena that got started way back from my reading, way back in the 30s, and became big in the 50s, and continued on into the 60s. So this is something where a lot of just otherwise normal suburban families would adopted this theme and would deck out their decks and their backyards with all this tropical decoration, the tiki statues, the waterfalls, the tiki bars, the torches, and they had collections of these albums of music. I understand, I was surprised to learn thousands of these albums were generated to satisfy the demand of the public for this exotic music.
It's true. It's kind of there was a confluence in the 50s and that just pushed into the 60s, where you had soldiers returning from World War II who were stationed on these exotic islands, and up to that point, travel was really limited. There wasn't a lot of world travel at that point, so you had these sailors coming back with these stories. You also had Hawaii was about to become a state. You also had the point where the middle class was doing well, and you had the point where air travel was starting to replace, week-long shipboard travel. So suddenly these exotic places got into the consciousness of the country, and it just exploded in the 50s and 60s.
And just about every actor was in a movie that adopted that theme, it seems, and a lot of the famous singers, performers of that time, put out albums that were tiki albums, and it really was a big. They were building buildings, not just tiki bars, but entire hotel complexes and apartment buildings were built on the tiki hut theme.
Yeah,
and it was really a big deal.
Oh yeah,
but I was young. I was just a kid. I was a child when most of this was happening, and I was barely aware of it myself.
Yeah, me too. I was young. I think I have these vague memories of going to Chinese restaurants, and as a kid, seeing that little door to the bar, which, most of the bars in Chinese restaurants were tiki themed, and hearing people and hearing the fun and seeing the little tiki in there and not knowing what that was. And it really was, it amazes me how big it was. I mean, some of these collectors that I know who scour bins and flea markets looking for tiki artifacts, they find things like, there were tiki haircut salons. It's just amazing to think how much tiki stuff there was, how many Polynesian restaurants there were, not just in metropolitan cities, but, in the Midwest even. It's just phenomenal. And now when we hit the 60s, it was just bigger than the 50s. And then right at the 70s, it went off a cliff and it just got erased from American consciousness.
Yeah, I think it did. I think it did.
And it's interesting because now when you look back at all of these artifacts, just these tiny little, like a matchbook from a restaurant that no one had ever heard of, it's almost like you're looking through a keyhole into a giant warehouse. So you can't see it all at once, but you know that there's something big in there.
Of course, a lot of us at my age were introduced as children to Tiki, if not through our parents and their luau parties and so forth, through Disneyland and the great the Tiki hut. What would they call that? The enchanted Tiki room at Disneyland, which I just loved. I was captivated and thrilled. I remember, they starts out with these mechanical parrots talking and singing, but partway through the show, all of a sudden the decorations that you assumed were just carvings on the wall, they all came to life and started singing, and their eyes were moving, and they're beating drums, and it was absolutely magical, and I just loved that place.
Yeah, it still is. It still is one of the major attractions there at Disneyland.
Well, now, Mark, let's talk about you and your career a little bit. You've been a musician all your life, I understand, and you play the vibraphones and keyboards. And tell us a little bit about your musical background, and then how you got into Tiki, because that was a relatively recent thing for you.
Yeah, it was.
As I think it was for all of us, frankly, as we're all coming back to it.
I had grown up fairly musical. I was in the high school marching band. I was in the jazz band at high school. And then in my 20s, I was in a rock band. And then in my 30s, I basically for 10 years, I guess my entire 30s, I was in a salsa band. Then we did quite well. We put out an album. We did some touring. I met my wife that way. Then I moved to Los Angeles, and I kind of fell into the Tiki thing because I wanted to build a Tiki bar. So then I started to research how to do that, and I by chance I found all these people that were into it. So, but I did discover Tiki music. I discovered Exotica when I was 5 years old. I had my mom's record, the Bahia album by Arthur Lyman. I put that on, and the bird calls just mesmerized me, and I played that album constantly.
I'm curious, is our entire generation going to come back to Tiki? Because it sure seems to be happening at some level.
The interesting thing is, I thought, almost 10 years ago when I got into this, I thought that it was just going to be a flash in the pan, like swing dancing was back in the late 90s. And it seems to keep getting bigger and bigger and gradually getting bigger and bigger. And it's amazed everybody. I know a lot of artists who've been into it from the beginning. The Squid, who does Tiki mugs. He's famous for Tiki mugs. I know Otto von Stroheim. There's a name for you. He's the guy who produces the Tiki Oasis event in San Diego every year. All of these people are still amazed that it gradually gets more popular every year. No one thought it would. Even the guy who wrote the book of Tiki, Sven Kirsten, I see him occasionally, and he's still amazed that it's getting as popular as it is. So it's amazed us all, actually.
Well, I, for one, couldn't be more pleased. I just think it's a lot of fun. A lot of it's a little campy.
Oh, definitely.
But that's part of what makes it fun, I guess. I, for one, of course, I just love the anything jungle is good for me. Let's get back a little bit to you and your music. You were doing jazz and you were doing a salsa band there for a while, and get that bar built?
I did. I have it.
Are you still using it?
In my house.
Well, good. That's great. You got to put a picture of that up on the web for us to see, I think.
Well, the sad thing about it right now is it's covered with a bunch of stuff because we're rearranging the living room. So
okay.
It's terrible. But
when the time's right.
I do have it and I use it. So.
Were you always doing keyboards and vibraphone? And did vibraphone become a more recent thing as you got interested in Tiki, or were you doing that even before?
Well, actually, vibraphones came later. I've been a keyboardist for forever and a day, and I was one of the original members in the Tikiyaki Orchestra, and I was the keyboardist. And in fact, for a time, it was just me and Jim Bakke, who's the head of the band and the guitarist, and we didn't know any vibes players, and so I was playing both the piano parts and the vibes parts, one day we just looked at each other and thought, you know what, it doesn't have the same kind of oomph to have keyboard vibes. There's nobody there playing on the mallets. Found a vibraphonist who was a high school teacher, and he just did not have the time. So he came to a few rehearsals, and he said, I'm sorry, guys, I don't have the time. And I looked at him and said, you know what? I'm going to get a used set of vibes because I've always wanted to learn how to play, and I'll just do it. And I did.
And you know, Mark, it occurs to me there's going to be some young people listening to the show that won't even know what a vibraphone is. So I think that may be true. So because it's not that common these days. It used to be more common, but it's not. It makes a beautiful sound. I think of it as an electronic version of a marimba. Would that be fair at all?
It's similar in setup. A marimba is all wood, and it doesn't have any sustain to it. So you just hit it with the mallet and boom. The vibraphones are made out of metal, and they've got a sustain bar, and it's got that. It's got these baffles that rotate that give it that vibrating kind of that wah wah sound.
Right.
A lot of people look at it.
They're like keyboards. They're big keys that you hit with mallets, so they're called mallet instruments. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. It's set up like a giant keyboard, which made it easy for me to move over to that instrument. A lot of people look at it and go, oh, it's a xylophone, but it's not a xylophone.
No, so what is a xylophone?
Well, a xylophone is that's a good question. There's a lot of instruments that are similar. The xylophone is kind of bell-like, and it's higher pitched, and again, it doesn't have sustain or the baffles. And marimba, of course, just being the wood instrument.
Just like a more primitive kind of simple wood. Keys on that, yeah. Why don't you introduce us to some early Tiki music? I understand you have some favorites you want to kind of introduce us to. What would be the first one you'd want to tell us about?
Well, the first one obviously would be the one that's nearest and dearest to my heart, which is the first Exotica song I ever heard, which was the song called Bahia by Arthur Lyman, and it was from his album, which was called Bahia, and I believe it was 1959, 1960. I can tell you that real quick here. It was, I usually have this stuff memorized, but as I have
there's an awful lot of music, and I'm so impressed with how much you know already. That's I wouldn't expect you to know the dates of all these albums, but Arthur Lyman was one of the leaders in Tiki music back in the 50s, and from what I know, he used to play with Martin Denny. He was one of his musicians. Martin Denny was like the he just kind of let it off. I was one of the most famous producers of this kind of music in the beginning, and Arthur Lyman broke away and went out on his own producing similar music. And I don't know. To my ear, it sounds Arthur Lyman's music sounds a little more sophisticated to me, a little more refined.
He went for more of a relaxed kind of. I don't know how to put it. Kind of swing. To me, swaying in a hammock is perfect for Arthur Lyman records. Martin Denny he stayed a little kitschy. He went into all kinds of different genres, not just Exotica, but it was actually Martin Denny's first album, which was called Exotica, that actually coined the phrase Exotica as a genre.
Is that where that came from, actually?
Yeah, it was. The story was he was trying to figure out a name for it, and some record executive just put an A on the end of exotic to make it sound more exotic.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
I'll be darned. Yeah, you wouldn't think it would be something so simple and obvious.
Yeah.
Okay, so this first one is Bahia by Arthur Lyman.
Arthur Lyman.
And the next song you'd like to introduce us to is a Martin Denny tune. Is that right?
It is a Martin Denny tune because he is the quintessential exotica artist, and it's called When First I Love, and it was actually on his second album, which was called Exotica Volume 2, believe it or not. And to me, that just has such a deep exotica feel to it. I like it, I have to say, more than the tune Quiet Village. So, yeah. So Martin Denny with When First I Love, which is quite a dramatic name for a song.
Well, let's talk a little bit about where Tiki might be going. I know we it seems the world is just coming back to Tiki, and there's a revival of all the old classic Tiki music. As a musician, you're in the scene, you're playing regularly to audiences now. How would you describe how the music is evolving? This is a new age and a new generation coming up learning this, and I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on a new take on Tiki. What would you say about that?
Well, that's an interesting question because, and it's also an interesting subject because here you have a group of new artists, a lot of which grew up on the tail end of Tiki, remember it as children like I do. Some of them weren't even around when the Tiki craze crashed in the 70s, that are, it's kind of, I'm trying to walk a fence here because not only are they creating new music, but they're also basing it on older music, which is really kind of a novel approach. I mean, they're trying to make music that sounds like it came out of the 60s and the original Tiki movement, but they're also, they can't help but give it a new twist. And I think it's just going to constantly evolve into, it's hard to say where it's going to go. Even I don't know because
Well, it's a creative process, and new people are going to put new spins on
Right.
it.
I mean, you have to,
And I would think it'd be real hard to kind of know where it's going to go, but you are seeing some changes, I take it, at this point already.
yeah, well, you take it with the Tikiyaki Orchestra themselves. We took classic exotica, surf music, and lounge music, and actually combined them all. And some of our tunes, you can hear those influences in the single song. Nobody had actually, believe it or not, had done that before. And I think that's probably what we're seeing now and what we'll probably continue to see in the future. People who want to keep a foot in the past but still combine things that are a little new. So it's hard to say,
And for the sake of our listeners, the Tikiyaki Orchestra is a tiki band that you're involved in. You perform in that band, is that right?
Yes, I'm the vibes player, and I have my persona in there is Marty Lush.
And they can visit the website. Is it the Tikiyaki Orchestra .com website?
Yes,
so,
yes, Tikiyaki.
So they can get familiar with it. And that go ahead and spell that for them.
It's just like teriyaki, but with a K. It's Tiki and then Yaki, Tikiyaki Orchestra.com.
And you would characterize your music as being a modern take on the classic tiki hits?
Yes, I would actually classify us as modern day exotica and lounge band. But lounge being not in the sense of, in a bar lounge, but lounge in the sense of that kind of swanky 60s swinging sound that today we call lounge music.
Okay. Now, did I read somewhere, Mark, that you're also involved in another band called Tiki Joe's Ocean?
Yeah, I've sat in on 2 albums by him, and I actually did vibes on a 3rd album that's about to come out.
Wow.
For Tiki Joe's Ocean. I'm just, I guess, a gun for hire with him. I've known the guy who does that, Andy Nazal, for quite some time, and he called me and said, would you play vibes on this? Of course I would. I'd be happy to.
So they have albums out also, and how would our listeners get familiar with their music?
Again, you can go to tikijoesocean.com and get that. I believe both Tikiyaki Orchestra and Tiki Joe's Ocean, you can also find those on iTunes as downloads as well.
And I have to say, I haven't sat down to listen to albums from either one yet, full albums, but thanks to you and your podcast, I've heard certain tunes from those albums. And I really liked them. I really like this modern take on tiki music. It's fun, and it's evolution. It's an improvement. I really like it.
It's fun. It's fun to do and still give it that vintagey kind of feel, and a nod to the '60s too.
You've got some more music for us to listen to that kind of point us in this direction. What's another favorite you can tell us about?
I do. Another classic tune, I gotta say, is Robert Drasnin's Chant of the Moon, and that actually came out on his album called Voodoo from 1959, and it was basically his only album for years. He went on to do music for the Hawaii Five-0 and Mission Impossible, and do a lot of film and TV scoring. But he did this one exotica record, and it was a big collector's item now. And then just a few years ago, he went back and did a follow-up to it called Voodoo 2. So it's kind of interesting. But the title track, or the first track on that album, is just one of my all-time favorites. It's called Chant of the Moon.
have a tune for us from the Tikiyaki Orchestra that you'd like for us to be able to share, and that's Pohu Mocu?
Pohu Mocu, which
I said that right.
You did say it right. I believe that
I've got to get used to this new language.
Yeah, I believe that translates into hidden beach or secret beach or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this an original with the orchestra?
It is. It's an original.
How many members do you have in that band? You have a few, from what I saw on a video. You got some of these up on YouTube. I know you got videos of this band performing.
Yeah, actually, the funny thing is, most of the YouTube videos are from other people who've taken them of our performances and posted them. So we're kind of grateful to have them. We actually have 7 people in the band. It's kind of a big group.
So it's an orchestra.
Yeah.
By Tiki standards, at least.
Definitely. We live up to that name, yeah.
Great. So this should be a lot of atmosphere in this piece.
Oh, yeah.
I've got to ask you. Mark. Since this is a podcast about jungle interests and all, and obviously Tiki music is really jungle music. At least that's what I've always called it and always thought of it as. And I'm just curious. I've got to ask you if you have any other jungle interests outside of this music. Any other hobbies or interests that you've things you've been a fan of over the years
that are
jungly that make you a jungle junkie like me?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, I've always thought, well, Gilligan's Island, I was a huge fan of it, and I have them all on DVD, and I watch it quite a bit. I never collected jungle things until I got into the Tiki stuff, but I've always grown up, with this kind of romanticized version of a jungle, of being someplace where everything is there at your fingertips. You've got running water, you've got fresh water, you've got food falling from the trees, and it's warm, and you can wear shorts. And I've always had a wonderful, kind of.
Now wait a minute! I hear an exotic animal in the background.
That's my dog. Yeah, she's. Yeah, but I've always, thought of a jungle as just a nice place.
Well, let me help you out here. What about other? We'll make a shift into another form of media. We shift from music into movies. Did you have you considered yourself a King Kong fan or a Tarzan fan? Did you movies like that get your attention in the past?
Yeah, as a kid, I remember some of the movies. I remember one movie that was kind of tiki and jungly, and it was with Dick Van Dyke, and I think it was called Lieutenant Robin Crusoe. It was a Disney movie where he's stranded on a desert island with all these women and in a jungle, and
Sounds good to me.
I remember that. Of course, the original King Kong, I remember it. The remake, which I kind of like the remake. I guess it would probably be the Tiki side of it, the more the Hawaiian stuff. Definitely the Gilligan's Island thing. That was
well, and so frankly, I mean, just listening to your podcast, it's clear that you tell a lot of little stories about the performers and various characters in the industry, both present and past, that I don't know how you'd find time to have other passions. But on this show we try to attract all kinds of people interested in all kinds of special interests and hobbies related to the tropical rainforests. Everything from poison dart frog breeders, which we're going to have some guests on, to Tarzan experts. I've got can make an announcement that we have go ahead on an interview with probably the foremost Tarzan expert in the country these days coming up, and that's going to be fun. There actually is a I don't know if you've heard about this, but there is an actual Tarzan running around Africa right now. Really? A young fellow, 25-year-old, who is determined to be the star of the next Tarzan movie, and so he's living the life of Tarzan. And he's got a great PR campaign. He's got some pretty terrific videos that have been done showing him running around Africa. And he looks great. He looks terrific for the part. His name's DeWitt Toy. I've invited him to come on to the show as a guest, too, but I haven't heard back about that. And it takes a little while to get emails distributed through the jungles of Africa. I think we might be in for a little wait on that one. But, we have people with all kinds of interests. I've always been interested in orchids and bromeliads and tillandsias and growing those things. And so I like to ask everybody about their hobbies and what kinds of things that they know of that they do that come from the tropical rainforest. Yeah,
and it's funny, not much for me. I mean, I've always been into cars, and I love to go to car shows, and I also collect movie soundtracks and things like that, but nothing specifically jungle.
Well, you're certainly our go-to guy for jungle music. And I really appreciate you being on the show here on Jungle Deep and introducing us to the world of Tiki and Tiki music. I urge everyone to check out your Digitiki.com website. You got lots of great articles and pictures on there, as well as 48 episodes, primarily Tiki music on there. Wonderful stuff. I haven't listened to all your podcasts yet, but I'm working my way through your collection because it's great fun. Well, and you even have some specialty podcasts there that are especially well done, even if they're a little off of what I would consider typical.
Oh yeah,
Tiki
they
fare.
are off. Some of them are way off topic.
Just last night I listened to the Halloween one, and that's got to be the quintessential perfect Halloween soundtrack. I don't think you missed anything on there. Really well done. Yeah. Well, I got to thank you again, Mark, for being on our show, and it's been a lot of fun, and I hope you'll come back soon. We've got to check in with you on occasion and find out what's happening. There are more questions. I'd like to know more about what's happening in the world of Tiki culture these days. I think it's going to be interesting to see because I think if anybody else out there in the world's anything like me, they're going to be coming back to Tiki and having some fun with it.
It is a lot of fun because it's kind of cheesy and kitschy and escapist, and who doesn't like that once in a while?
All right, you heard it from the man. Well, thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Be sure to share Jungle Deep Podcast with your friends and coworkers. The show is my creation and at my personal expense. It is not currently subsidized by any business or organization. Audience growth is especially important for Jungle Deep to succeed and prosper. So share the show. You can see beautiful photos and learn more about Jungle Deep at our website, calaverasgold.tv. Now that's Spanish. Calaveras, Calaveras, gold, gold.tv. You gotta check it out. Where else can you go for this kind of fun? Just click on the Jungle Deep title in the header directory. Our show notes pages have valuable links for you. I invite you to email me at jungledeep@calaverasgold.tv and follow me on Twitter. Search for Jungle Deep or Ken Jones 56, all one word. I would love to hear your ideas for the show. Well, the show is over for today, so it's time to refill my Mai Tai, mount my elephant, and head back into the jungle.
Like a flame in the sky, flying over the island to my lover nearby. Flamingo, with your tropical hue, for it's you I rely on, and the love that is true. Sings a song to you as you go, the song that I hear below, the murmuring Flamingo, when the sun meets the sea, say farewell to my lover and hasten to me. The wind sings a song to you as you go, a song that I hear below, the murmuring pause. When the sun meets the sea,